Hello, welcome to my new exercise channel, in which I hope to encourage people to exercise at home, which is easy, cheap, and it can also be more fun. First thing I want to talk about is exercise at home and some of the advantages of doing so and some of the disadvantages of using a gym. Now, there'll already be people saying, what's wrong with a gym? And the answer is nothing. But the problem is a lot of people treat that as the first call. If they're told they need to exercise, if they decide they want to get a little bit fitter, and a lot of people will never think of any alternative. Every new year you get newspaper articles, online articles, saying things like, we've all overindulged over the Christmas period and now we need to join a gym. And there's never a thought of doing anything but that. When I used to listen to the radio a lot, there'd be radio programmes talking about how women in particular will feel embarrassed and under a lot of pressure in the gym. And they might use that as an excuse to never do any exercise. Now, I've worked with a lot of people who use a gym, and some of them would say, I spent 2 hours at the gym last night, and what they really meant is they finished work at 6 o'clock, got home at 8 o'clock, and what happened in between is anybody's guess. Now, sometimes you need a gym if you need special equipment, and especially if you need to train with other people. If you train in combat sports, you'll be very limited if you don't have other people to train with. One reservation I have about people relying on gyms is the amount of time it can take just to get there and to prepare yourself. If you exercise at home, you could have done 10-15 minutes of exercise while the person using the gym is just travelling to the gym, change, finding a parking space. Now, if you have specialist needs, using the gym might be the only choice you have. But if you just want to get a bit fitter, a bit healthier, perhaps lose a bit of weight, I find it difficult to think of a very good reason to use a gym other than the social aspect. And perhaps that's important to you. But if we have people out there who feel shy and embarrassed about using the gym, then that barrier should be torn down right away. Now then, one of the problems exercising at home is a lack of equipment. I started training in Shotokan karate a long time ago, and it was years, over a decade, until I actually had a bag to use. And the purpose of this video will mostly be improvisation and looking at some of the things you can do to improvise equipment if you don't have access to very much of it. Now, I spent a long time training in martial arts before I had any equipment to use. I got a heavy bag when I was about 20 years of age. I had nowhere to hang it, and in the average rented apartment, there's not a lot you can do about that unless you really want to annoy the landlord. I've got these gloves with it as well, and I use these now in trying to demonstrate some of the ways you can improvise if you don't have a heavy bag to hit. And you'll already guessed, this is quite an obvious one. Now then, recently, a martial arts video maker I quite enjoy watching made a video talking about trees and telling people not to use the trees, leave them alone. This is because of people who've seen movie Kickboxer a few too many times and think the right thing to do is to kick trees down with your shin to condition them. And I agree with him, don't do that to trees. But there's a lot you can do without risking damaging them. And the average tree isn't going to care about the odd little push kick. You can't hit too hard, especially not with these rather true bag gloves, but it gives you something. Branches, something to move around. Better keep your guard up so you don't get a poke in the eye, and you can get close, keeping a good posture to get used to position for a takedown. And just moving around it gives you something more to focus on than shadow boxing alone. Wouldn't like to elbow it too hard. Kicking's no problem with the foot, and punches are fine. I actually had a pretty good willow tree when I was young. I didn't use for this, and I wish I had. So, first thing you can do, if you've got a pair of gloves, and you've got no heavy bag to use, and you've got a garden, is make use of any trees you've got. Right then, let's have a look at a different type of tree-based improvisation. Of course, here you need something to hang it from, and I do plan to make a video with some ideas of improvising punch bag stands. The most obvious, which springs to mind, is a ladder. Now then, you need a stand to be able to do much with this, but it's a lot cheaper than a punch bag if you don't want to spend a lot of money on one. A filled bag easily costs you £100 or more, good quality one, a couple of hundred. Now, you've got to be very careful how you hit this, which is good for accuracy. It moves around nicely, a lot more than a bag usually would. You've got to really think about where you hit it. And I'd say, if you're using thin gloves, it'll be pretty good for hand conditioning. Not enough to do any damage to them, but it'll give a good impact on the knuckles, and you definitely better make sure you hit it pretty squarely. That is whether you choose to use the 2 knuckles or the 3 knuckles, which is definitely a subject for another video. Wouldn't like to use the shins on it much without pads. Or, as always, no problem for a front kick. And I quite like this. Not tried it before. A neighbour of mine was having a tall nuisance of a tree cut down, and we managed to get the workmen to give us this, and it's been sitting around for years without much purpose, but I think I could see myself doing this from time to time. But you've got to be careful. No fast combinations. And because of the way it hangs, it doesn't move around in a very predictable way, which may be quite an advantage. Right, and that brings me on to a very easy, cheap way to improvise something to hit, which I've heard mentioned by other people, and I've seen it in other videos, but not really talking about having them free hanging. Now, I first saw tyres being used in the Krav Maga video for hand conditioning. Let's leave that where it is for now. And since then, I've seen people use them as punching bags, stacking them horizontally. You can have them freestanding. You might want a post in the middle of them to hold them up, and that's a really good cheap way to get something to punch. You find the average garage will happily give away used tyres because they're not of much use once they had their tread taken off of them. And I like them like this because you can punch them at the front. You've got a nice surface for a hook, and you've got a lower surface for uppercuts and knees. These will definitely condition your hands. In this weather, it's okay. When it gets to 1 or 2 degrees, or even below, you don't want to punch these very much. But I find them very useful. Mostly I use gloves with them, and I find them useful to practice particular punches that you might not always think to. When you're using the bag and you move around it, after a while, I find I start to forget intent, and I might end up just throwing punches that can be useful from a fight perspective, or they might just be exercise that's always going to be good for you, but not particularly good. They could treat you bad, teach you some bad habits. Not that this is going to eliminate that, but it certainly makes you think a different way for a jab, hook, uppercut. good to grab onto, grapple for the knees. I've also noticed, incidentally, when they're full of water, you give them an elbow and it sends a flurry of water your way, so you have to make sure you parry at the same time. And of course, if you're in a situation like me where they're hung up without a lot of space around them, then you move to the other side to do things the other way around. If I didn't have other punch bags to use, I'd probably take a stack of these and hang them so they can swing around a bit. But for my purposes, this is perfect. Again, you need somewhere to put them. You could hang them from a tree. You could use a ladder. Tyres cost nothing. £5 worth of rope. And you've got something to punch. Now, I use a little bit of elastic here to help them spring back. I've actually had them tied up a lot tighter than this before now. But I haven't really found the time to do it. But you can do what you want. You could just hang them together. You could probably use cable ties if you really wanted to. And here's perhaps the easiest, cheapest and most convenient way to find something to punch if you haven't got a punch bag. I just had to take a minute to free the rope from the top of the punch bag stand. There's barbed wire up there, and one of the problems with an outdoor punch bag stand is you get birds using it like a tree and they crap all over it, hence the barbed wire. Before I go onwards, just want to talk about one more of the problems I think gyms cause for people, some people. And that's when people need to exercise, want to exercise, or have been told they must exercise, and they join a gym and they think, that's it, I've done it, I've joined the gym, there's a solution. And it's a token that doesn't really achieve anything. What they need to do is go to the gym one day, next day, not in a row. You need to go to a gym for 3-6 months to really make much of a difference to your physical state. And they work perfectly for some people, but I've known people and I've seen people who need to get fit and say, I've joined the gym, there, I've done it. And of course, it really achieves nothing on its own. As I said earlier, gyms are really good, sometimes essential. I just think the average person who just needs to get a little bit fitter, a little bit healthier, can probably do better than going to a gym, and they can save a lot of money. On that subject, I recently looked at the membership cost for the nearest gym to me. It's really more of a fitness studio. I wouldn't really want to use it anyway. Haven't got a lot of equipment other than machines. Probably play awful music. It's £69 a month. Maybe I'm just behind, because I thought you could get cheap gyms for about £20 a month on the wrong side of town, and £40 was about average. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just out of date. Of course, the prices of all sorts of things are rising. £69, you can buy a lot of equipment. If you save £69 a month for 6 months, let alone a year, you can have all you need to exercise at home. And as I will go on to in future videos, you don't really need anything except for a bit of space. Don't even need a garden if you just want to get fitter. Right, now just have a look at one more item for improvising use when you don't have a punch bag. This is clearly really just for fun, but let's see just how well it works. As you can imagine, I got enough exercise just bringing the anvil up here and hanging it. I was going to do it on camera, but it took a while. Now, I wouldn't try to hit this very hard, and I don't think anyone would want to. But let's just use it as an experiment to see how far you can go hitting things you wouldn't normally hit when you've got some gloves on. These are the old, very old bag gloves. Now, what's to my surprise is you can give it a jab. It's not really how hard it is, because these protect you a lot against that. Obviously not compared to steel anvil, but a jawbone's pretty hard, and that's how a lot of people break their hands if they get into fights at the wrong time when they're not equipped for it, without wraps or gloves. What makes this hard to hit is its refusal to move. It's about as bad as hitting a tree. It doesn't want to move immediately, and that push kick nearly pushed me back. So it's limited, but it can be fun to try. And what it does show is if you can hit an anvil with gloves on, then you can hit a wall gently. You can hit a wooden beam. If you've got a pergola, If you've got all kinds of wooden garden furniture, then you can hit that and you've got something as a target. And just to go a little bit further, let's see what it's like when you've got on a more serious pair of boxing gloves. These are cheap. I don't think you'd want to spar with them because you might be laughed at, but they're pretty heavily padded. And I think I'll be able to punch the anvil just a little more without risk of injury, but let's see. Yep, a bit harder. And like a punch bag, you've got the different surfaces. So you could do a bit of an uppercut there, and then the side's good for a hook. And maybe, just maybe, you could grapple with it. And here you've got a bit of an underhook. And it's not easy to lift, believe me. But then, it's probably about maybe 3/4 of the average person's body weight, half of a large 6 foot man's body weight. But there you go, it works. And if you can do that, you can practice some punches on the wall. And maybe you've got some things you can try hanging up to punch. Right, I think that's it for this one. Obviously it's not been entirely serious, it's also been my first video. I've been learning to edit as I go along, and it's taken me a while. I'm going to make some more serious videos with more practical suggestions for what you can do at home when you want to improvise and when you don't want to use the gym. I've got some short programs for warming up from the start, which I hope to encourage people to use. Then some steps that you can do that really get you out of breath. Just 5 or 6 exercises that you can do in a cycle, essentially interval training. And you could put together 10-minute warm-up, 10-minute interval style training, and you could do it in your kitchen, you could do it in your bedroom. And if you did that for long enough, often enough, you get a lot fitter. Going to look at some techniques as well, going to look at some lifting, and hope to do that as soon as possible. Also plan to do some reviews of equipment. There's some equipment I bought that I was very unsure about. It's fairly expensive, and when I was buying it I couldn't find good reviews to tell me exactly how good it was. So I think that'll be useful to people. And that's it. Thanks for watching. If you watched this far, my name's Mark, and see you in the next one. Cheers.